The school week was coming to an end, and this meant only 1 or 2 carefree days of rest and relaxation. I danced into the store, bought a bunch of drinks and crunches for the upcoming evening, which I planned to devote to a home movie show. And it was on this Friday evening, when I was already making plans for the coming weekend, that my father called me. We talked to him quite rarely, so his call was a big surprise for me. I, after a little hesitation, answered the call. Hi, son. How are you there? Haven't you forgotten your old man yet? He asked jokingly. No, of course, try to forget you. What happened? Why are you calling so late? Yes, I've been thinking for several days about inviting you to go fishing. After all, we used to go with you at least somehow, and then you left to study, and my health was not the same. How do you look at it? I hope you don't have any plans for this weekend. I sighed, dumbfounded. I definitely did not expect to hear such spontaneous news. In fact, there were plans, and even a lot, but my conscience did not allow me to refuse my father. I agreed. A joyous voice with a hoarseness on the other side of the tube exclaimed. Great. Then come by when the time is right. Even tomorrow, even the day after tomorrow. Things, fishing rods, and so on, I'll cook myself, so you can get there light. Is it good? Yes, it will do. I answered after a little thought. After talking with my father for a few more minutes and wishing him good night, I finally ended the conversation. I was tormented by an unpleasant feeling of indecision. On the one hand, a carefree weekend, quietly spent at home doing what I loved, and on the other an early rise, a long trip and the subsequent 8 hours sticking to floats. Still, my father was counting on me. I really didn't want to upset him. After all, we don't see each other very often. We need to get in touch at least sometimes. And fresh air obviously won't hurt me. Therefore, reluctantly, I postponed the pile of conceived plans for later. Tomorrow I'm going to the village on the first morning bus. The trip to the destination was boring and unremarkable. During their lives, everyone has already traveled a million times in the Paziki that are living out their age, so I think everyone feels familiar and understandable. When I got off at the right stop, located in the forest belt, I went along the route I had learned for a long time. As I walked, I suddenly realized how much I had distanced myself from this place. As a child, I looked with surprise at the tall trunks of pine trees, admired every bush and blade of grass. Literally everything awakened my childhood, long-forgotten thoughts and feelings. My heart felt very calm and warm. But my heart was filled with even greater warmth when I saw my father on the threshold of his native house, beaming with a smile through his grey beard. We went into the house. A rich onion soup was already waiting for me on the table. His smell seemed to take me back to my childhood for a second. So, over a plate of fragrant soup, our conversation began, which lasted almost the whole day. We kept discussing pressing issues. There seemed to be no end to our conversation. And already sitting at dinner, we began to discuss the details of our tomorrow's outing. Look, son. We get up early tomorrow at 4 a.m. This is the most biting. We're going to spend the night. There is an old hunting lodge by the lake, so be calm for the night. The stove is working there, so we won't be lost from the cold. And now it's time to go to bed, soldier. My father patted me gently on the shoulder. And a few minutes later I was already lying under an old wool blanket, looking forward to tomorrow's catch and a wonderful time. In the morning, I found my father in the kitchen. He was preparing our breaks. A lot of sandwiches with bacon, flatbreads and other things. Immediately went into a hiking backpack. Dressed in fishing suits and taking fishing rods, we set out on our way. On the way, I stared out the window, admiring the forest scenery. An hour and a half later we were there. The ewer's brakes squeaking, stopped in front of a slightly askew hut. To tell the truth, I didn't trust her at all. A gust of wind, and this shack will fold in half. However, my father assured me that this house will outlive us with him. Having laid out the broad things inside the building and having flooded the furnace, we, without wasting a minute, went towards the lake in the pre-dawn twilight. As they approached, the coastal smell of freshness was more and more clearly felt. Soon, a serene expanse of water appeared before my eyes, disturbed only by dragonflies landing on it and the moving stems of reeds. I haven't experienced such peace for a long time. Having cast our fishing rods, we began to wait for the bite. More precisely, my father was waiting for the bite, and I looked in amazement at the endless water, covered with haze and going beyond the horizon in a border of green semicircle of vegetation. At that moment, I was not interested in anything except this fascinating view, which, as a city dweller, was a novelty to me. Overflowing emotions made me blurt out an involuntary phrase. It's crazy. What a beautiful lake this is after all. Yeah, the father drawled, and dangerous. I was slightly pulled back and I asked again. I was sure I had not misheard. The father, as if realizing that he had blurted out too much, immediately retreated. I say. Beautiful. And. He hesitated for a second. In general, watch the float, otherwise we'll make a horseradish soup like that. You'll miss everything. rudely cut off the father and, frowning, glared at the red and white ball on the surface of the water. It was noticeable that something seemed to be bothering him. I didn't get into trouble, maybe I really heard it, and silently continued fishing. 3 hours later we were able to catch several wetty carp, from which we brewed a cauldron of fragrant fish soup. Over a hearty dinner cooked over a campfire, my father relaxed a little and became kinder. This was also facilitated by several bubbles of white, prudently captured from home. During the chatter, I forgot our strange conversation on the lake. So, during a cheerful conversation, we did not notice how the night twilight was gathering over us. At one point, the father, wiping his mouth with his sleeve, glanced at the clock and changed his face. His eyes widened, and he turned pale and shuddered a little. Drunken mischief instantly dissipated, giving way to strong anxiety. Having blown up from the spot, he grabbed me by the scruff of the neck and forcefully dragged me into the house. I didn't even have time to understand anything, as I immediately found myself lying on the carpet in the hallway. The father closed the door with a bang with 2 locks and a latch, after which he began to run around the rooms and blind all the available windows. Still not understanding anything, I, rubbing my bruised ass, loudly exclaimed, "What kind of tricks are these, Bat? What the fuck is going on? You'd at least bring an ear into the house, she wouldn't disappear. Oh my god, I'm going to bring it myself." I sullenly headed for the door, fully prepared to pull the handle down. "Mishka, hold your fucking leg, stop, damn that ear. Don't you dare go out." And then my father's voice was interrupted by a strange howl that came from the direction of the lake. It was as if it was a radiation siren or a whale. The noise gradually increased, pressing on the ears. With the increase in its volume, something incomprehensible was happening behind the closed curtains. The darkness on the street began to thicken incredibly quickly, plunging the already dark room into an impenetrable black veil. My father was sitting on the floor with his back against the sofa. In his hands was clutched a cross. My father's lips were trembling, inaudibly whispering some prayer. I sat and watched in horror the bacchanal that was taking place. The brain flatly refused to accept all this madness. And then suddenly everything was silent. The hum subsided, followed by dead silence. For several minutes I tried in vain to listen to the surroundings, but apart from the buzzing in my ears and my own breathing, I could not hear anything. The forest birds, which had been chirping all day long, also fell silent. Something told me that this was clearly not good. I do not know how many hours I sat motionless. The body seemed to have fallen into a kind of trance. The measured snuffing of my father brought me out of it. Apparently, he was asleep. I got up as quietly as possible and immediately bent over from the cutting pain in the abdominal area. My bladder, which had been showing no signs of anxiety for all these hours, suddenly became active. I immediately rushed to the toilet. Having done the deed, I went back to the room. On the way, a sudden thought occurred to me to look out the window. Fear immediately turned into curiosity, which attracted me to the drawn curtains, like a moth to a fire. Really, well, there wouldn't be anything wrong if I looked through the crack at what's going on there, I thought, and how wrong I was. Constantly squinting at my sleeping father, I pushed back the edge of the curtain with my little finger and looked out into the street. And what I saw there plunged me into an indescribable shock. Beyond the windowsill stretched an impenetrable darkness. A dense grey-blue fog enveloped the surroundings of the hut with its veil. It felt like I was just looking at a concrete wall. Trying to see at least something in this smoke, I was surprised to come across a few blue dots darting in the distance. I rubbed my eyes. The dots flashed through the fog again for a split second. There were 7 or 9 of them, walking in a semicircle behind each other. Then a similar glow appeared from the other side. And then, suddenly, a crushing blow flew through the window. The glass flew into the room, scattering like hail on the floor. Well, then, someone's hand grabbed me by the collar. More precisely, it was a paw. It took me a second to see it. Black and slimy, like oil. The limb was covered with prickly scales. And there was a kind of fin on the forearm. Then I realized that the 2-fingered webbed hand holding my sweater had incredible strength. Trying to escape from the death grip of the monster, I witnessed how the owner of this terrible hand appeared from behind the frame. A huge fish head with lumpy growths and big eyes stared at me with an expressionless look. I reflexively smacked the creature in the face, and it was a fatal mistake. The fish-headed monster screamed and immediately began to transform. He somehow puffed up all over, and a webbed slimy hood opened on his head with a nasty slurp, forcing the toothy mouth to stretch even larger. On the spiked bone shell of the creature, several long stalks appendages rose, at the ends of which blue dots shone. That blue glow seemed to emanate from every part of his vile body. All this action lasted no more than a minute, but for me it seemed like an eternity. I was brought out of my stupor by the cry of my father, who threw a stool into the slippery face of the creature. The monster loosened its grip and, falling, disappeared into the fog. My father jerked me away from the window and swore, "Miss Ha, what have you done? I warned you. Now you and I are definitely finished." After these words, I plopped down like a log. Panic and awareness of the horror of our situation finally killed in me a sound perception of everything that was happening. However, this was only the beginning. Dozens of blue lights lit up in the fog. Apparently, that creature attracted its vile relatives with its screeching. The father rushed to the closet for a gun. At the same time, I was standing in a corner, paralyzed with horror. Having loaded the gun, the father blindly fired a double volley into the fog. On the other side of the broken window, a terrible scream rose. And having loaded a few more cartridges, my father, turning to me, commanded, Mishka, hold the door. Don't let them in. With shaking hands, I began to move dressers and bedside tables to the entrance and, as it turned out, very timely, a powerful blow flew into the door. The father also cocked the gun at the door. Get down, he screamed, and once again shied away from two barrels, leaving large holes in the door. The sound of the shot, like a bell, struck in my head. Everything swirled and swam. The ringing mixed with fear completely exhausted my body. The last thing I remembered was my father's blurry face above me, muffled screams and several shots. I woke up only in the morning on the couch and with a wet bandage on my head. Everything was still sparkling and floating before my eyes. After lying like that for about 5 minutes, I still raised myself on my elbows. My father was sitting by the broken window, smoking a cigarette with a shaking hand. Looking below, I saw an impressive mountain of cigarette butts. He noticed that I got up. Is he alive, Mishka? He asked in a slightly trembling voice, continuing to look out the window. Is it good? Good. It's over. They're gone. And indeed, the usual sunlight beat through the window and the chirping of birds could be heard. After a little silence, I asked a question, the answer to which completely changed my life. Bar. What was that? The father, however, took a drag and began his story. Son, after I tell you everything, you may stop communicating with me. But I don't care anymore. You have to know the truth. When we were young, your mother and I often went to this place. Overnight stays, gatherings around the campfire, everything. We spent time there together, not paying attention to the old people's stories that this place is not good. The same as you were hot young. Soon we got married at the 8th month of her pregnancy with you. They decided to celebrate the wedding right here at this very place. And when you were born, we moved to live in our village house. However, we were not happy for long. On the same summer night, a fog hit the village. It was then that I first encountered these underwater creatures. They took your mother right out of bed. And I stood like a coward and watched them go and couldn't do anything. Since then, a heavy burden has been on me. I have brought a curse on my entire family. We had a wedding on the land, and for this now, for the rest of my life, I am obliged to bring a bloody payment for my recklessness. They have already taken your mother and grandmother. You were next in line that night. I had to give you to them to be torn to pieces. But I couldn't. And something tells me that I will pay bitterly for this. After that, we just sat in silence for a few hours, and then packed up and drove back. The road also passed in silence. Upon arrival in the village, without saying a word, I left in the direction of the bus stop. My father didn't try to stop me. When I got on the bus, I tried to forget all this horror I had experienced. And as soon as I was in my apartment, I immediately fell motionless on the bed, unable to bear the stress that had piled up anymore. It's been 2 months since that nightmarish day. I have almost recovered and returned to my old life. I didn't contact my father anymore. Yesterday I decided to call him, but he never picked up the phone. I hope everything is fine with him.